There are mornings now when I come in before 6 to turn the diner lights on, and I already know what the day is going to look like. Her car will be in the lot at Millbrook Elementary by 7. That means she'll come in before 8, and I'll have her coffee poured before she makes it through the door, and she'll sit in the corner booth and grade papers or sketch something in the margins of her planner. And that will be enough to make the whole morning make sense. I did not always understand why it worked that way. I told myself for a long time that I was just good at my job, that I paid attention to all my regulars the same, that there was nothing different about the corner booth and the woman who sat in it. Then one Thursday evening in February, standing in the cold parking lot after closing, she said something to me that made the pretending impossible. Hers and mine both. This is the story of the 8 months before that, and the 8 months worth of things I had been not saying that finally had somewhere to go. My name is Sam Holloway. I am 33 years old, and I have lived in Millbrook, North Carolina my whole life, on the same side of the same mountain where my grandfather opened Holloway's Diner in 1963. It is not a large place. 7 tables, a counter with 8 stools, a kitchen that fits 2 people if they trust each other, and a window facing Main Street that catches the morning light in October in a way that makes everything look like a painting somebody would want to live in. My grandfather ran it until he couldn't. My mother ran it after him. I started washing dishes when I was 10, and moved to the grill when I was 14, and took over the books when I was 18 because my father had left the previous year and someone needed to. I am not bitter about that. My father was not a bad man. He was a restless one, which is a different thing, and Millbrook was not made for restless people. He sent money the first few years and then he didn't, and I made the diner work on what it had. And somewhere in those years of showing up every morning and keeping the lights on and knowing everyone's order before they asked, I became the kind of person people described as the backbone of a place. The one who stayed. The one you could count on. I was proud of that. I am still proud of it. The cost was one I didn't examine much. That I was 33 years old and the most consistent relationship I had was with a diner that needed me every day, and with a town that had learned to take that for granted. I was everyone's first call and nobody's first thought. I had made peace with that the way you make peace with weather, by accepting it and dressing accordingly and not spending too much time wishing it were different. Then, Margot Ellis came to Millbrook in August and sat in the corner booth, and everything I had decided about what my life was going to look like stopped being the whole picture. She arrived on a Tuesday in late August, which I know because Tuesdays are when we get the produce delivery, and I was doing inventory in the back when May hollered that there was someone new at the counter. May had been cooking in my kitchen for 11 years, and she did not use the word hollered lightly. I came out, and there was a woman in the corner booth. She had moved from the counter on her own initiative, which most people didn't do, with a box of apartment things on the seat beside her, and the look of someone who had been organizing a move all morning and was taking a break from the organizational part. She ordered coffee and a biscuit. She sat for an hour. She came back the next morning and the next, each time with something slightly less chaotic about her. The boxes were gone by the 3rd day, replaced by a canvas tote and a sketchbook. On the 4th morning I said, "Corner booth?" When she came through the door, and she looked at me for a moment like she was deciding whether to be surprised. And then she said, "Yes, please." And I poured the coffee without asking. She was the new art teacher at Millbrook Middle. I knew that by the end of her first week because Millbrook is that size. I knew she had taken the apartment on Elm Street, the one above the bookshop, because May's cousin owned the bookshop. I knew she was from Columbus, Ohio, because she mentioned it once, briefly, the way people mention their hometown when it is the only relevant context and not a thing they want to talk about further. What I did not know, what I noticed I did not know, was why she was here. Every regular has a reason for the way they use the diner. Retirees use it for company. Contractors use it for a hot meal between jobs. Couples use it for the booth in the back when they need to talk about something without their kids around. Margot used the corner booth the way a person uses a place that is not home, but is close enough to be a substitute for it on mornings when being in the apartment is too much. I noticed that. I did not say anything about it. In September, She came in on a morning when her eyes were red, and she was moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who had not slept well and was managing the consequences. She sat in the corner booth and ordered her usual, and I brought it out and did not look at her eyes directly. And she looked at me like she had been bracing for a question and was relieved when it didn't arrive. She said, "Thank you." I said, "See you tomorrow." She nodded. I went back to the counter. May caught my eye from the kitchen pass-through, and I shook my head slightly, and she went back to the eggs. There was a thing Margot Ellis was carrying that she was not ready to put down. I had been running a diner in a small town long enough to know the difference between someone who wanted to be asked and someone who needed to not be asked. And she was the second kind, clearly, so I did not ask. By October, she had become a presence in the diner the way certain regulars do. Not just a customer, but a fixed point. Someone the place organized itself around without deciding to. May knew her name, and her order, and her opinions about the quality of the apple butter, which she considered acceptable but not exceptional, and said so directly, which May respected. I learned her the way you learn regulars when you were paying attention, that she took her coffee black in the morning and with cream in the afternoon, which told me something about her mornings versus her afternoons, that she sketched in the margins of everything, her planner, the paper napkins, the back of the receipt when I forgot to take it back, that she had strong views about public art and no patience for anything she called decorative without purpose. She helped once when we were short-staffed, a Friday in October when my one waitress called out sick, and the breakfast rush came in harder than usual. Margot put her sketchbook down and started clearing tables without being asked, the efficient way of someone who has done service work before. She stayed for 2 hours. When it was over, she went back to the corner booth and finished her coffee like nothing had happened. I brought her a second biscuit on the house. She said she hadn't ordered a second one. I said I knew. She looked at me for a moment. Then she ate it. After that, I started leaving the biscuit on her table before she sat down. She came in, it was there. She said one morning, "You don't have to do that." I said, "You always get it." She said, "I know, but you don't have to." I said, "I know I don't have to." She looked at me and then she picked up the biscuit, and that was the end of that conversation, for a while. On a Thursday evening in mid-October, she stayed after closing. Not for any specific reason she named, she just didn't leave when the last customer did, and I didn't tell her we were closing because I didn't particularly want to. May went home. I stacked the chairs. Margot helped with the chairs on her side of the room, and then we sat at the counter and talked for an hour about nothing consequential. The school mural project she was designing with her students, a news story I'd heard on the radio that morning, the particular quality of October in the mountains versus October in a city, which she said was incomparable. At some point, she laughed at something I said about one of my more difficult regulars, a genuine laugh, the unguarded kind, the kind that arrives before the person decides to have it. Then she looked at the counter. She went quiet. I said, "You okay?" She said, "Some days I am." I said, "And other days?" She said, without looking up, "Other days I'm real good at pretending." I did not follow that. I let it sit. She said goodnight a few minutes later and gathered her things and left. I locked up and drove home and thought about what she'd said in the specific way you think about things when you understand them, and don't yet know what to do with what you understand. The following Tuesday morning, I came in and found a folded napkin on the counter with a sketch on it. She had drawn the diner from across the street, Main Street, the front window with the lights on, the sign, the morning. She had drawn it small and quickly, in the margin sketch way she used, but it was accurate. The lights in the window were right. She had not signed it, or written anything on it. I put it in the drawer under the register and went to start the grill. The 14th of November was a Wednesday. I noticed Margot wasn't in Monday morning. Or Tuesday. By Wednesday, the 14th, she came in late, after the breakfast rush had cleared, and she was moving in the careful way she had moved in September, the way of someone managing something at close range. May asked me quietly, that afternoon, if I'd heard anything about Margot. I said I'd noticed she'd been in late. May said she'd talked to someone at the school who'd mentioned it had been a hard few days. I found out the rest from May's cousin at the bookshop, who knew Margot's neighbor. The 14th of November was the first anniversary of her mother's death. She had not told anyone in Millbrook. She had been in that apartment above the bookshop since Saturday, managing it alone. I did not arrive with a speech. I made a container of the chicken soup May kept for rough days, the good version, the one with the good stock and the biscuits on the side, and I drove it to the school at lunchtime and left it at the front office with her name on it. No note. There was nothing to say in a note that the soup didn't already say. She called that evening. She said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "May made extra." She said, "Sam." I said, "How are you doing?" She was quiet for a moment. A long one. Then she said, in the flat, careful voice of someone who had been saying the same word for a year, "I'm okay." I said, "You don't have to be." Another pause. Longer, she said, "I'll see you tomorrow." She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. Then I set it down and went to check on the grill and thought about what I was doing and what it was costing her and whether they were the same thing or different ones. Carl Ellis came to Millbrook in January. He was 5 years older than Margot and built like someone who had been practical about everything his whole life. Medium height, steady hands, the direct eye contact of a man who had been looking after something for a long time and had gotten very good at assessing threats. He came into the diner on a Tuesday morning before Margot arrived and ordered eggs and coffee and looked at the room with the thorough attention of a man who was learning a place his sister had chosen. He introduced himself when I brought the coffee. He said he was Margot's brother. He did not ask if I knew her. He said it the way you say things to someone you already knows. He said, "She talks about this place." I said I was glad. He said, "She's not doing as well as she lets on. I think you probably know that." I said I did. He ate his eggs. He was quiet for a minute. Then he set his fork down and looked at me directly in the way of a man who had been thinking about what he wanted to say for most of a 3-hour drive. He said, "She does this when things hurt. She finds somewhere new and she builds a structure and she holds it together by holding herself together inside it. And after a while she starts to feel better and she tells herself she's fine, and sometimes she's right." He paused. "But sometimes it's just that the new place is working hard enough that she doesn't have to." I waited. He said, "She told me this was 1 year, that she'd come back to Charlotte after the school year." He looked at the diner, the counter, the corner booth, the window. "I can see what this place has done for her. I can see what you've done for her, or what I think you've done." He picked his fork back up. "I just don't want her staying for the wrong reason. I don't want her thinking she's okay because someone's being good to her. That's not the same as being okay." I said, "What's the right reason?" He looked at me. He said that she wants the life she's building, not just that it hurts less than the one she left. He finished his eggs. He paid the check and left a reasonable tip and drove to Margot's apartment. That evening, Margot came in for dinner with Carl, and I served them, and we were professionally cordial, and Carl watched the two of us with the assessing expression of a man tallying something. When Margot went to the restroom, Carl said to me, "Lo, I told her something like what I told you, about making sure she's staying for the right reason." He paused. She went quiet. "You'll probably see the result of that." I did. For the following week, she came in, but she was careful. She ordered without the ease she'd developed. She sat in the corner booth but did not stay past her coffee. She was not cold. That wasn't who she was. But the thing that had been slowly, quietly coming open between us had been reassembled, and I could see the construction of it from across the counter. She did not take the biscuit one morning. She said she wasn't hungry. I took the biscuit back and said okay and went to refill someone else's coffee. May watched me do it. She watched me in the way May watched things when she had a strong opinion and was deciding whether to say it. She did not say it. She went back to the kitchen. Carl drove back to Charlotte on a Wednesday. 2 days after that, Margot came in and the biscuit was not on the table before she sat down. She ordered it when she ordered her coffee. I brought both. She thanked me without meeting my eyes. I brought her a second cup of coffee at 8:30 when she was still there. She looked up when I set it down. She said, quietly, "You stopped doing the biscuit thing." I said, "Didn't know if you wanted it." She looked at me steadily. There was something working behind her eyes that I could not fully read. She said, "Can we close up early tonight?" I said yes. May went home at 7, which she did with the helpful efficiency of a woman who understood what she was being helpful about and was not going to make anyone ask twice. I locked the front door. Margot sat in the corner booth. I sat across from her. The diner was quiet. The window showed the dark street outside. I had turned most of the lights off except the counter and the booth. She looked at her hands. She said, "My mother's name was Patricia. Everyone called her Pat. She was the most specific person I have ever known. She had opinions about everything. Not big things, just everything. The right way to fold a towel. Which exit to take off the highway. How long to steep tea." She paused. Pancreatic cancer. From the diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks. She said it with the flat precision of someone who had narrated the facts enough times that they came out in order now. But underneath the order there was something that had not been organized. I could hear it. She said, "I was with her the last 6 weeks. I came back to Columbus after and I walked into my apartment and every single thing in it. The towels in the cabinet, the tea on the shelf, the way I'd arranged the kitchen, was something she had touched or suggested or adjusted when she visited. I couldn't be in that apartment." She stopped. I didn't say anything. She said, "I applied for the Millbrook position because it was the first posting I saw with a start date that got me out of Columbus before September. I told myself it was 1 year. I told everyone it was 1 year." She looked at the table. "I told myself I wasn't building anything here, that I was just, in between, that I was somewhere temporary while I figured out what was next." I said, quietly, "And?" She looked up. Her eyes were bright. "And then you left soup at the front office," she said. "And I went home and sat on the floor and cried for 2 hours, and when I was done I felt better than I had in a year. And I couldn't explain why except that it wasn't the soup. It was that someone had noticed and hadn't made me explain it. And I thought, if a place can do this, if a person can do this..." She stopped. She shook her head. "But I keep telling myself it's temporary," she said. "I keep telling myself I'm not going to stay. I'm not going to let this be real. I'm not going to need any of this, because the last thing I needed I lost." Her voice was tighter now. "And I can't do that again." I said, "I know." She said, "Do you?" I said, "I think so." She looked at me across the table. She said, "I need to know something." I waited. She said, "Is it going to stop?" I said, "Is what going to stop?" She said, "You. The biscuit, the soup, the way you refill my coffee before I ask." She looked at her hands. "The way you looked at me when I came in on November 15th. You didn't say anything and you didn't not say anything. You just..." She stopped. "You just made it so I didn't have to decide how to be." The diner was very quiet. I said, "No. It's not going to stop." She said, "That's what I was afraid of." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to let it be what it is without being terrified that I'm going to lose it." I said, "You don't have to decide that tonight." She said, "I know." She looked at the window. "That's also the problem." She picked up her coat. She said goodnight. I watched her walk to the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle and stood there for a moment. Then she pushed through and was gone. I sat in the empty diner for a long time. Then I locked up and drove home. The February night was the kind of cold that is specific to mountain towns. Clean and still, and a little sharper than you're ready for when you step outside. She had stayed through the dinner service, in the corner booth with a book, the way she sometimes did when she did not want to go back to the apartment. I had not asked why. May had gone home. I had locked the front and was doing the last of the chairs. Margot helped with her side of the room, same as October. When we were done, we went out the back, and I locked up. The parking lot was lit by one overhead lamp that cast everything in a flat yellow that made the cold look somehow colder. Our breath came out in clouds. She had her coat buttoned wrong by one button, and she had not noticed. She was looking at the ground. She looked up. "Stop being so good to me," she said, her voice breaking. "It's making it hard to keep pretending." I looked at her. I knew what she meant. I knew it the way I had known things about her for 8 months. Not because she had explained it, but because I had been paying attention. The pretending was the wall she had built in August when she got to Millbrook and decided this was temporary. The pretending was the 1 year she had told Carl and herself and everyone who asked. The pretending was I'm okay, and it was I'm just in between, and it was I am not going to need this place or this person or any of this because I cannot afford to lose anything else. His goodness, the soup, the biscuit, the way he never made her explain her bad days, had been taking that wall apart one small piece at a time, and she had been patching it behind him as fast as she could, and she was tired. I said, "Then stop." She said, "Stop what?" I said, "Pretending." She stood in the cold and looked at me, and something in her face moved. Not crumbled, opened, the way something opens when it has been held shut for a long time, and the grip finally gives. She said, "I don't know how." I said, "Start with tonight." She said, "What about tonight?" I said, "Tell me something true." She looked at the lamp. She looked at the ground. She looked back at me. She said, "I don't want to leave Millbrook." I said, "Okay." She said, "I don't want to leave the diner." I said, "Okay." She said, "I don't want to leave." She stopped. She breathed. Her voice was not broken anymore. It was just quiet and certain. I don't want to leave you." I crossed the 2 feet of cold parking lot between us. I said, "Then don't." She was still for a moment. Then she leaned forward and put her forehead against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her coat, and she stood there in the parking lot behind Holloway's diner in the February cold, and did not pretend a single thing. We stayed like that until the cold got to be too much. Then, I drove her home. I said goodnight at her door. She held onto my hand for a moment before she let go. I drove home and sat in my kitchen and understood, with the particular clarity you get when something you have been patient about for a long time has finally resolved, that the day had been exactly the day it was supposed to be. She called Carl on a Sunday in March. I was not there for the call, but she told me about it after. She said, "He was quiet for a long time, and then he said okay, and then he said, 'Is he good to you?' And I said yes. And he said okay, good, and that was most of it." I said, "That's high praise from Carl." She said, "That's basically a standing ovation from Carl." She signed the second-year contract in March. Principal Whitfield said she had been hoping Margot would stay, and said so in the warm, direct way of a woman who meant it. The middle school mural was finished in April, a panorama of Millbrook's history on the gym wall, in colors that the building had no right to but was better for, the mountains and the main street and the people who had built both, rendered by 12-year-olds under the guidance of someone who had taught them that art was not decoration. The opening assembly? May brought biscuits. Margot caught me looking at them and shook her head. She went back to Columbus in April, just for a weekend, the last of her mother's things, the final piece of the estate. I drove her to the airport on Friday morning. On the way back Sunday night, she was quiet, looking out the window at the dark road, and she cried for part of the drive without explaining it, and I did not ask her to. When we got to Millbrook, she said thank you in a voice that meant more than the word, and I said I'd see her in the morning, and I did. By summer, she was not a one-year teacher from Columbus. She was Margot Ellis, who taught art at Millbrook Middle, and who had an opinion about the apple butter that May had quietly started taking into account. The town had made room for her the way small towns make room for people who earn it. Slowly, and then completely. I asked her to marry me on a Tuesday morning in October, before the diner opened, with May making deliberate noise in the kitchen. I had nothing prepared, except the truth, That I had been keeping this place running for 15 years for everyone who needed it, and I would like to build something that was mine for once. That I had found someone I wanted to cook for not because it was my job, but because it was the thing I most wanted to do. She said yes before I finished. The napkin drawing is still in the drawer under the register, the diner from the outside, the lights in the window, drawn small and quick on a Tuesday morning in October, before she had any reason to think I would keep it. I moved it twice by accident and put it back both times. I never told her it was there. She knows.